4,000 years. Just think about that for a second. That is how long China's story as a continuous civilization has been going. It's a massive, almost overwhelming scale, right? So you might be asking, how on earth do we make sense of it all? Well, it turns out we can, by using one single, powerful idea, a kind of key that unlocks the whole pattern of its history.
And that really is the central puzzle, isn't it? I mean, you look around the world, the Romans, the Ottomans, so many other huge empires. They rose, and then they fell. They were gone. But China, it just kept going. Sure, it would collapse into total chaos, but then, like a phoenix from the ashes, it would be reborn, unified, again and again. So what was the secret sauce? What was the engine driving this incredible resilience? It all comes down to one single concept that shaped, well, pretty much everything.
And here it is, the mandate of heaven. Now, this isn't just some dusty old religious idea. You got to think of it more like the core operating system for Chinese history. It was the ultimate rulebook, the justification for who got to rule and who got to rebel, and it ran the show for thousands of years. Okay, so what is it exactly? At its core, the mandate of heaven is this belief that the right to rule comes straight from a divine power, from heaven. But, and this is the absolute key, it's not a blank check. It's not automatic. It doesn't matter who your dad was. It's more like a performance-based contract. If you're a good ruler, if you govern justly and keep things in order, then yeah, heaven has your back. You're legitimate.
But what happens when things go south? You know, when a ruler fails, when corruption is everywhere and the emperor is just completely incompetent. Well, that's when you lose the mandate. Suddenly, all those floods, those famines, those massive peasant rebellions, they're not just random bad luck. No, they're seen as signs from heaven itself, screaming, this dynasty has lost its right to rule. And this idea creates a really predictable pattern, something we call the dynastic cycle.
So, once a dynasty collapses, the whole cycle just reboots and begins all over again. And that brings us to the upswing of the cycle, the rise. This is the phase of unifiers and golden ages, where new, powerful leaders claw their way out of the chaos to restore order and, you guessed it, claim that mandate for themselves.
And you can see that pattern laid out perfectly right here. It always, and I mean always, starts with chaos. The land is plagued by war or floods. Then, step 2, a new leader emerges, maybe a legendary figure like Yu the engineer, who supposedly tamed the rivers. Then comes the unification. This is your Qin Shi Huang, the guy who just brutally hammered the warring states into a single empire and standardized, well, everything. And finally, all that hard-won order leads to a golden age, like the ones we saw under the Han and Tang dynasties, when things were stable, prosperous, and really flourishing.
So what does a golden age actually feel like? Well, it's an absolute explosion of progress and culture. You've got the Han dynasty bringing back Confucian values. Under the Tang, the population just booms, from 50 to 80 million people. You get world-changing inventions. We're talking paper, gunpowder. The Silk Road is buzzing with trade, connecting China to the rest of the world. The empire is expanding its influence. This is a dynasty at the absolute top of its game, with the mandate of heaven shining brightly upon it.
But of course, what goes up must come down. It's inevitable. Every single golden age eventually starts to tarnish. The rot begins to set in, building and building towards the unavoidable collapse. And what's so fascinating is how you can see a dynasty's entire story in the arc of its emperors. On the one hand, you've got the founder. This person is almost always brilliant, competent, a real force of nature who unifies the nation. But then you fast forward a few hundred years, and you get the final emperor, and they are often the complete opposite, lost in luxury and debauchery, totally losing control, and in the end, their cruelty is what sparks the very rebellions that bring the whole thing crashing down.
And just to show you this isn't some abstract idea, listen to this description of Di Xin, the last emperor of the Shang dynasty. We're talking massive orgies, sadistic torture for anyone who opposed him. It's even said he had his own uncle's heart ripped out. I mean, wow, this goes way beyond just bad leadership. In the framework of the mandate of heaven, this is a giant, flashing neon sign that your time is up. It's basically an open invitation for someone else to step up and take the mandate.
Now, the threat didn't always come from a peasant rebellion or a corrupt court. Sometimes, the whole cycle got a major plot twist. The threat came from the outside. Powerful invaders at the gates who saw a weak, decaying dynasty and smelled blood in the water.
And this is where things get really interesting. Twice in its history, all of China was conquered by outsiders. First, you had the Mongols, who set up the Yuan dynasty. Their strategy? A super rigid four-tier caste system to keep control. Then, centuries later, the Manchus from the northeast invade and create the Qing dynasty. They took a totally different tack, a mix of assimilation and control. They famously forced all Han Chinese men to wear that specific Manchu hairstyle, the queue, as a sign of submission. In both cases, these foreign rulers had to figure out how to use the Chinese system to rule a people who saw them as outsiders.
So for thousands of years, this was the rhythm of China. Rise, fall, chaos, repeat. It just kept turning. But then, in the 19th and 20th centuries, something different happened. A perfect storm of internal decay and, for the first time, overwhelming pressure from the outside world finally and permanently broke the cycle.
So how did this 4,000-year-old system finally come to an end? It was basically a three-punch combo. First, the Opium Wars. This is where Western powers, with their modern armies, just completely humbled the Qing dynasty, kicking off what's known as the Century of Humiliation. That internal weakness then fueled the Taiping Rebellion, one of the deadliest civil wars in all of history. And the final knockout blow? The Wucheng Uprising, a revolution that finally led to the last emperor giving up the throne in 1912. And just like that, millennia of dynastic rule were over.
And the cost of this final collapse was just staggering. I mean, look at this number, 20 to 30 million people. That's not the total for the whole collapse. That's the estimated death toll from the Taiping Rebellion alone. It's almost impossible to comprehend. If there was ever a brutal, undeniable sign that a dynasty had catastrophically lost the mandate of heaven, this was it.
But here's the thing. Breaking the cycle didn't bring peace, not even close. It unleashed decades of pure chaos. You had the warlord era, where the country shattered into pieces. Then came a brutal invasion by Japan. And on top of all that, a vicious civil war between the nationalists and the communists. China was right back where it always started, a fractured, broken land, desperately looking for someone, anyone, to unify.
And that brings us right up to the modern era. And it leaves us with a really provocative question. Did the cycle truly end, or did it just change its clothes? Who, in the 20th century, was going to claim this new modern version of the mandate?
Well, out of the ashes of that civil war, a new, incredibly powerful unifier emerged, Mao Zedong. And if you look closely, you see echoes of those founding emperors from centuries past. He used absolutely ruthless methods to grab power and unify the country. The execution of over 1 million landlords, the catastrophic famine of the Great Leap Forward, the violent purges of the Cultural Revolution, it was a brutal, bloody reforging of China under a completely new ideology. But that underlying pattern was there, unification at any cost.
Which brings us to the crucial question for today. When you look at modern China, with its incredible economic power and its highly centralized government, you have to wonder, was the dynastic cycle truly broken for good, or did the Communist Party just claim a new, modern mandate of heaven, kicking off that same ancient pattern of rise and eventually fall, just under a different name? It makes you wonder if we're just watching a new chapter in a very, very old story.